All right, I'm going to delete the my face because this computer is not set up to do that. So the little blank thing that you see up there is me, really. Okay, so before we get into this, I just want to tell you how I became involved in this because we're going to be talking about African wildlife, and I'm not an expert, but um, I was a volunteer for Earthwatch, and some of you may have heard of Earthwatch. It's an organization that sponsors field research, and it does something that most sponsors don't do. Most sponsors give a chunk of money to people who want to do research. Earthwatch gives them a chunk of money and a team of volunteers to do the work that they do, which means that people like V and me can volunteer for some really interesting things. And one of which is this one that I'm going to talk about today, which was doing a wildlife survey, a census of big animals, big herbivores. So to start the talk, and I'll tell you more about Earthwatch later on if you're interested. Walking the Thornveld and I used to have a lot of fun with audiences here, and I say, how do you pronounce that? And everybody botches it up. And the reason I botch it up is that HLU, which you see at the beginning of that word, is a sound that does not exist in the English language. It's from the Zulu language. And it's pronounced shkr, as in slush with a in it. So Shlui Imphalosi is the way that's pronounced. It's the name of a wildlife reserve, which I'm going to tell you about. So the next thing I need to do is that. Okay. So we're going to talk about the wildlife there. And the expedition that I did was in 2004. This was the biennial herbivore census conducted by KwaZulu-Natal Nature Conservation Service in cooperation with Earthwatch. KwaZulu-Natal is the easternmost province of the Republic of South Africa. And I'll show you a little bit more about that on a map. So the thing that Schlurium Pelosi is known for above all other things is it's where the white rhino came back from near extinction. This is a white rhino. And let's come in a little bit closer on that. At the turn of the 20th century, owing to poaching and meat hunting, there were about 100 white rhinos left in the continent of Africa. And the biologists at Schlurium Pelosi took it upon themselves to bring the white rhino back. And they did a fabulous job of it. So from 100 in 1900, when I was there in 2004, they had brought that number back to 11,000. And the latest figure on that seems to have stabilized at about 18,000. So that's the population in Africa. You may have seen, if you follow these things, you may have seen the fact that the white rhino was extinct in Kenya. That's the northern subspecies of this. The last male died, there were 2 females left, and that is it. But the southern white rhino, which you're looking at here, is very healthy. For bird lovers, if you're interested, those birds sitting on top of him spent their entire life there. They are yellow-billed oxpeckers, and they live on the parasites that the animal has. So there's a lot of wonderful creatures in this, and we'll talk about them as we go along. But in the meantime, let me get you fixed on a map. Here we are. This is the southern tip of the continent of Africa. You can see the Republic of South Africa at the bottom, and above it, the countries of Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, and so forth. And we're going to devote ourselves to this area of the continent right here. So let's bring that up. And to get where we're going, you would fly to Johannesburg, and then you would take a short hop flight over to Richards Bay, which is a mining and lumber port on the Indian Ocean. And from there, you would take a 4-wheel drive vehicle up to here, which is where the Schlurium Pelosi Game Reserve is. So we'll be talking a lot about that. And notice just to the right of the red dot, is a little body of inland water there, which is the St. Lucia Bay, and we'll be looking at that and some hippos a little bit later on. So when you drive into Shafluian-Pelosi, this is what you see. This is Thornveld. This is savanna. This is open country, peppered with acacia trees, rivers running through it. It's quite stark, but quite beautiful. And a little bit about the game reserve itself. It's Africa's oldest reserve. I think it's about 120 years old now. And it is approximately 360 square miles, which is not particularly big. Kruger, you've probably heard of, to the north of it is much bigger than that. But it's sizable. And the thing that's unique about it is it's protected by 100 miles of fence. The entire park is surrounded by 8-foot high elephant-proof fence, which is not something you find in most of the other reserves. And the reason for that is really twofold. First of all, it's to keep the animals in, because getting out makes them subject to all kinds of depredations. And it's also to keep the local cattle out so they're not competing with these animals, which are herbivores here. It's pristine country. Thornveld is what you saw in the picture just before, and it's savanna. And another popular thing about Shafluian-Pelosi, it's the home of the Big Five. These are the tourist animals that people most want to see: elephants, rhinoceroses, Cape buffalo, lions, and leopards. And there are lots of other animals besides them. So a little bit about the size of the park. We made our camp here where the circle is. And to get from one end to the other there, this way, it's about 15 miles, but it takes you about an hour because the roads are very narrow and kind of bumpy. So another 15 miles to the north. And that gives you an idea of the size of Shafluian-Pelosi. As far as tourists go, there are only two ways to get in here. There's an entrance here, and there's an entrance up here. Tourists are welcome to the place from dawn until dusk. They are asked to be out of there by dusk. And there's one abiding rule that everybody has that comes into it: do not get out of your car. There are a couple of places where there are overviews where there's a parking lot and you can get out there, but do not walk beyond the parking lot. Why? Because it's dangerous, because the animals that live in this park are wild animals. So here's the countryside that we'll be dealing with: open savanna and acacia trees. Some of it is riverine. There are several rivers that are in the area that run through, and not too much greenery except along the waterways. Since this was August, which is the middle of winter in South Africa, you might notice one piece of wildlife in this photograph. Can you see it? In the lower left-hand corner, there's a monitor lizard sunning himself. But this was the typical countryside that we were doing our census on. Why were we doing it in August? Because it's the middle of winter and the leaves are off some of the acacia trees, which means sighting animals is easier. In the January, February, during the rainy season, you wouldn't see a lot because everything is so thick. Now, a little bit about the animals. One of our principal concentrations was rhinos, and I'll tell you a little bit about the species. But as you've probably seen, these animals are undergoing huge pressure. And the reason for that is that thing sticking up off the end of his nose, the horn. For some reason, the legend has perpetuated in Southeast Asia that rhino horn is good for curing everything from cancer to hangovers, which is total BS because it's nothing but keratin, which is what your fingernails and your hair is made of. It's also purported by some people to be an aphrodisiac. And as some scientific wag said recently, if you really believe that, don't spend a lot of money on the rhino horn, just chew your fingernails because it's the same stuff. Now, why are they under pressure? Because that horn that you see on his head is worth about $400,000 in the retail market. Now, that's not what the poachers are paid, obviously, because there's a chain of distribution that goes there. But um, rhino horn on the Asian market retail goes for about $65,000 a kilo, and a typical horn is 4 to 6 kilos. So you do the arithmetic; it's pretty scary. So anyway, that's why they're under such pressure for poaching. Um, a little bit about the species themselves. On the left, you've got the white rhino, and on the right, you've got the black rhino. There's distinct species. The white rhino is a herd animal. It's huge. It's the second biggest mammal, land mammal. It's about twice the size of the black rhino. And the black rhino is a solitary creature except for during the breeding season. The white rhino, when they see a person like me walking, will run. The black rhino is considered the second most dangerous animal, that's just Louis Infilozzi, after the elephant. And believe me, elephants kill a lot of people. So a little bit about the difference on these two animals. You'll notice on the white rhino, it has a flat lip as opposed to a hooked lip on the black rhino. The reason for these lips is, here's a picture of the skull of a white rhino, and you'll notice that it has huge grinding teeth, huge molars in the back, but absolutely no teeth in the front of the skull at all. So it's the lips that differentiate them. It's the lips that make them capable of, in the case of the white rhino, pulling up grass and grazing, and the black rhino is a browser. So it tends to eat trees and bushes and bark and that sort of thing. White rhino and black rhino is not descriptive from the standpoint that this is an accurate illustration that shows they're both the same color, which they are. Why white rhino? They should be called flat-lipped rhino. Flat-lipped rhino and hook-lipped rhino. Why white rhino? Most people believe it's because, and you can see it in this photograph of the head-on picture of a white rhino, that white came from the Afrikaans word for wide. That's the general belief as to where this originated. Because when you see them in the wild, this is 3 white rhinos. You can see they're not white at all. So they're pretty magnificent animals, and it was a real privilege to see them in the wild. A little about the other animals in the park. There were about 250 African elephants. Cape buffalo, there were many, many, many. This was a nasty old male. The buffalo are, again, herd animals. The thing you have to watch out for with the buffalo is that the herds are run by the cows. And the males, once they've reached their usefulness as far as the cows are concerned, they are turned out of the herd, and they spend the rest of their life being very, very angry and nasty and tend to take it out on other people. Zebras, there are 3 species or 4 species, some people say, of species. This is the plain zebra, which is the common one. These were all over the place. They're wonderful animals. And of course, giraffes. These were my favorite. And huge, huge animals. When you stand near one of these things, you realize you barely come up to the underside of their belly. They're about 15 feet high. These were warthogs. Not too much to worry about, except if you notice on the front of his face there, you can see his tusk, and there's another tusk in the back. They don't bother with you, but if you happen to pass one and he's backed into a hole to stay out of the sun, he may come out and thrash around with it and do some damage on you. There are many, many species of antelope there, and the most common one is the impala, of which this is the male, the buck. Beautiful, graceful things. The Zulus like to point out that it's easy to identify an impala because it has the McDonald's M on its stern, which you can see here. Now, I got lots of pictures of impala because they're everywhere, but the other antelopes in the park were very hard to take photographs of because, like the deer around here, you see them and they're gone. They're gone. So these are the other animals that we were working with, going from the left counterclockwise. Counterclockwise. We've got the water buck. The Zulus have this legend that they love to tell their children that when God created the world, the water buck sat down on the toilet when the white paint was still wet. And ever since then, he's had that marking in his stern. The kudu up at the top is absolutely, I wish I could have gotten pictures of them because they're magnificent creatures. And then down, coming around the corner here, we've got Nyala. And the reason there were two Nyalas there, the male and the female, was that for years, scientists didn't realize that they were male and female because they looked so different. And then down at the bottom is the bush buck. And the other common ones that we were counting are the blue wildebeest up top. You've seen, I'm sure, the pictures of the Masai Mara, where there's millions of these things. A big flock where we were would be 50. And then the little duikers down the bottom, which are little sort of loner antelope, which would tend to lie down in the tall grass, and if you pass too close, would all of a sudden thrush out and scare the bejesus out of you. And then other animals in the park, there was really two kinds of monkeys. This is the Savannah baboon, and there was also vervet monkeys. Lots of beautiful insects and some birds, but remember we were there in August, which is the middle of winter, so most of the bird life had gone north for the winter. And then the carnivores. In the Sicilian Floozy, there are 5 important carnivores: the lion, obviously, the leopards, cheetah, and then the spotted hyena and wild dog are the 5 carnivores that are common there. So these are the animals that the herbivores, the ones that eat greenery and not meat, are the ones we were concerned about. And so you would be right to ask the question, well, why count them? Why do we care? So to answer that question is very simply this: it's to identify and remedy an overabundance, or it's to identify and remedy an unnatural species decline. The reason for that is that we all can look and see easily what the greenery aspect of the park is: the grass, the trees, the plants that the herbivores live on. But it's hard to see the animals themselves because they're much, much harder to count. So we're just looking to find a balance of ecology between the herbivores and the herbs, if you will. How do you remedy it? If you've got too many, the large ones go to auction. Large ones meaning elephants, rhinos, buffalo, and so forth. Small ones, which would be the smaller antelopes mainly, would go to bushmeat. And I can tell you that having eaten nyala, it's as good as any venison I ever had. So the market is good for that. If there are too few, they are imported from other reserves. And this goes on all the time in Africa as they maintain the populations of the reserves, which is where the wonderful animals are. So it's not uncommon to see one sell a few of its elephants to another one, or also zoos are there from all over the world getting animals for their own purposes. So we're counting herbivores. Now, here's a typical scene. How many animals do you think there are here? Well, it could be 300. It could be none. So how do we go about counting them? A typical answer I get from people is, well, you get an airplane and you fly it over. Well, guess what? It doesn't work. There may be 50 buffalo lying out of the sun in those green trees right in the foreground there, and you won't see them. Or if there are animals out in the open, in order to get low enough for an airplane to identify what they are, you scare them away. So it just does not work. Another possibility is to get everybody in town and line them up in a big row and give them pots and pans and have them beat and make a huge racket and just march forward and drive all the animals out into the open and drive them into the next country where you'll never see them again. So the technique that we were using is a very common technique that's called distance sampling. It was developed originally to count, believe it or not, porpoises and whales. And it's used very successfully for animals and birds as well. Here's how it worked for us. The volunteers that we were in walked 26 different transects. And in the picture on the left, you can see a transect, which is just a straight line, which has been mowed down to make it easy to walk. They walked 26 transects, 6 days a week, over 8 weeks. Average length of the transect was 4.9 miles, which is a lot of walking. And all herbivores within 500 meters on either side were recorded. So in other words, you were counting all of the herbivores within a strip of 1,000 meters wide. And what data were you collecting? What species? How many of them? What distance were they from the viewer? What direction were they in? And what was their GPS position? In other words, the computer that's going to analyze this wants to know not just how many you saw of what, but where were they? And out of this, the data, the population of the reserve is concluded by computer analysis. It's a very complex amalgam, I was going to say, you know the word. It threw me off. So here's the picture I showed you again, and here's the transect which has been cut. And our job is to walk one-on-one behind the ranger that was assigned to us each morning. There was just two of us, him, and about 10 feet behind him was me. And his job was to protect both of us with a a South African army rifle, which is made to kill people and not elephants. And this was a thing that was a little bit disconcerting to some of us because you can't really stop a charging elephant with a 7.62 millimeter cartridge. But nevertheless, we were very brave and we did it. You can see in this picture, in the center, just to the left, you can see the transect cut across the grass there. This gives you an idea of how these things were situated. This is the southern part of Shoshone Pelosi, and here is a typical transect. Okay, you notice it goes from a road and to a road, and you notice when I put these things in that they go from right to left. The reason for that is that the sun comes up in the east, which is to the right, and our job was to be out there at first light in the morning. So you wanted the sun in your back while you did this. So we would go from one road to another, and when we got to the end of the road, we would radio ahead and be picked up and come back. So these were all of the transects that had been cut. And this one, that one right there was my favorite because you notice that it ends up crossing a river, which meant you had to take your boots off and cool off your feet, which was terrific. So those are the transects that we walked. We were assigned to a different one every day, each one of us with a ranger. And down to the left is wilderness area, which was left alone for the animals to enjoy by themselves. This was me with all the gear that I was carrying. Around my neck, I've got a rangefinder to tell how far the animals were away, a GPS, a compass for direction. In my right-hand pocket, I had a camera. The left-hand pocket, I had a little bit of water and some candy bars, and I'm carrying a clipboard which is what I use to record. Notice behind me, there is a horizontal line. This was the campsite that we used, and that horizontal line was charged at night with 8,000 volts to keep out any curious elephants who decided to see what the humans were doing tonight. Um, the cautious part of it was that you notice it's high enough so that a hyena or a leopard could easily walk underneath it. So if you got up during the night to do the businesses that we do at night, you were very, very careful with your flashlight. Here's how we collected data each day. Um, Going from the left to right at the top, the transect number 23, that was the date. I was the observer, that was my rangefinder number. The field ranger was Mandla. Next line was started at 6:16 a.m. And then a bunch of codes because the computer wanted to know what the cloud and rain weather situation was, wind direction, wind strength, and so forth. And then down below, we recorded each of the species we had a code for. RW, as you might guess, is white rhino. And this would tell us that I saw two. Was it accurate? Sometimes you weren't sure, and the computer wanted to know that too. Yes, it was accurate. How far was it? 47 meters. What was the sight bearing? 42 degrees, and so forth and so on. In other words, and then the GPS gave you the latitude. So this is telling the computer exactly where they were. And then you've got the vegetation type. It wanted to know that. And the last one, which you may be hidden on your computer, is burn. And I'll explain that in a minute. And then the next line, giraffes, I saw 4, and so forth and so on. And so we filled these out. A really good day would fill out this sheet with, I think it was 30 different blocks. And we'd come back with a full sheet. So it's a lot of animals that we would see on a good day. And after we get back, which is usually around 11 to 12, the next job was to enter it into the computer every day. So that was the chore that we had for 6 days a week. Now, I mentioned there was a head called burn there. And the reason for that is that this is a burn ecology. There are some plants that have prospered here for millions of years that will not germinate unless they're burned. So normally in the past it was done by random by lightning. Now it's controlled burns that are done by the rangers. And when I first saw this, I thought, well, I don't want to go there because if it's just been burned over, it's just all charred and terrible, and there's not going to be any animals for a long time. Well, I was wrong because this is just 2 weeks after a burn. And you can see how fast the grass germinates and comes up. These are 3 warthogs that are having their breakfast here. Now, a little bit about our group. This was a bunch of volunteers. They were all Americans. And this was a briefing session when we first got there. I think this was a bathroom break, so some of the chairs are empty. And we were getting all kinds of talk. This lady was the principal scientist. A botanist actually, and a lot of the talk was safety. How do you deal with this? And it was a little bit scary. For instance, what do you do if you're charged by a buffalo? Well, you know, picture a buffalo's horns that come down with a curve, and the advice was lie as flat as you can, and don't put your head up, because they can't, with the way their horns, they can't hook it under you and flip you over. And of course, the next thing somebody would come up with was, what about a black rhino? And the answer was, climb a tree. So yeah, there was some risk involved in this, and they knew it. And that's why we had, each one of us had a rifle-bearing ranger along with us. So this was just a picture I took as the sun came up and we were walking the transect. Some of the scenery was really lovely like this. And as I said before, each one of us followed right behind an armed ranger about this far away. These guys were really good. I mean, these were Zulus, all of them, and they've lived in this area their whole life. And without them, we couldn't have done the job. I had so many cases where I would be looking, I wouldn't be seeing much of anything. And he would stop and he'd raise up his hand and I'd say, what? And he'd say, impala. And I'd say, how many? And he'd say, 12, no, 14. And all I'd see would be a couple of ears sticking up over a bush. Um, so we depended on them really heavily for spotting these things. This is a typical sighting. So it wasn't like walking around a zoo. This is a plain zebra. And this is what you'd see. And usually you wouldn't see it very long because they know when people are on foot, they are predators, and they know the best thing to do is make distance between thee and me. This is a typical sighting for impala. Uh, there were, as I recall in this thing, about 20 of them behind that bush to the left of where the animals are. But you had to move around and you had to see them, and uh, it was challenging. These are blue wildebeest. This was a typical herd that you might have seen. These are really, really crazy animals. Uh, the Zulus like to explain the blue the animal, which they call Nkonkone. That's the Zulu name. When God finished making all the animals, he had parts left over. And out of those parts, he assembled the Nkonkone, which is a weird, strange antelope. This is a typical sighting. In the distance, you can see 4 plain zebras heading along. And in the foreground is a white rhino. And this is typical of how we would see them and how we would stop and record and then just keep going to see what was around the corner. And you notice in this photograph that they are really tense, especially the animal on the left. And this was because when you did get a sighting like this, they look on us on foot as predators. And so they would look us over, they would tense, they would spring, and they'd be gone. So you had to be very quick. This is a water buck. You can see the white paint on the rear ends here. And sometimes you'd see a couple of species in one sighting. This is a zebra and a couple of warthogs, both of which we were recording. And then these guys, they didn't bother with us. They are very regal animals. And this old male was he just kind of watched me as I walked past, and I watched him. The Zulus call them Ilulamites, which apparently translate to eats at top of trees, which is what they do. Although an interesting factoid I picked up there is this is the male, because the males eat at the top of the trees and the females eat a little bit farther down, and I'm not going to get into that one any farther. So this is the Cape buffalo that I told you about, and this is one of those nasty old males that you really had to be cautious about because they think little about charging. And we actually did, one of the ladies that was a volunteer did get charged, and the guard had to turn it away with a bullet in the shoulder. Elephants, our instructions were, this is the way you want to see an elephant, far, far away. They are very dangerous. They kill people. And our instructions were, if you come across elephants, get the hell out of there. We know how many elephants there are in the park. They're easy to count. So don't bother with the elephants. But so this is my first sighting with the camera. This was a white rhino. And if you look carefully, right in front of her head, you can see 2 little ears. And this was a calf that she had with her. And this is where you want to be really careful with these animals because the calves are curious and want to come and inspect you, and the mothers are very, very protective. So I shot this with a telephoto lens. We were probably 50 yards away, and that's the distance that you want to have with these animals. The transects weren't all easy. This transect cuts right through the middle of the picture and down the hill. And it was especially precarious because there were a lot of rocks there, and all the rocks had been turned over by baboons looking for scorpions, which are a wonderful breakfast. So you had to watch your footing. And sometimes we'd come to these ravines and have to climb down one side and up the other. These are caused during the winter by the rains. At this time of year, it was dry season and was none. But here's another one of the ravines that we had to deal with. So it wasn't all easy. It was pretty energetic. And as I mentioned, the one transect that I loved was this one because you got to take your boots off at the end and walk across the river to where the road was, where we would get picked up. This is another one of the Zulu ranges. Did I worry about crocs? Not there because it was too shallow, but up where the water was deeper, yeah, were Nile crocs, and they are perfectly capable of putting away a human being. So you had to be careful. Now this one, and with live audiences, I love to ask people, "What do you think it is?" And then I give them a clue, which is this. And there's usually a couple of audience members that have been paying attention to what their grandkids are watching and say, "Oh, Arthur Aardvark." Well, that's correct. And as he knows, this is what's in that can. This is an aardvark, which is an ant and termite eater. He's nocturnal. He digs long tunnels that go way back underground. And they're very rarely seen. I talked to the head ranger there and asked him how often he saw them. He said, "I've worked here 27 years and I've seen two." So they're very, very special when you do get to see one. So this was a rather precarious situation because the ranger that I was with knew that this lady had a calf. And if you look very carefully, you'll see under her chin was about a week-old calf. So again, you had to be very, very cautious with these animals. And this, of course, was what you did not want to come around a corner and see. This is one of the wonderful old bulls. Now, I said our advice was, when in doubt, climb a tree. Well, this is typical acacia. And you just kind of hope that it wasn't going to be one of these that was nearby when you got the order to climb a tree. So a little bit about the place where we lived. This was not a tourist area at all. Masinda Camp was strictly a research facility for the biologists working in the area. Very primitive. I spent 2 weeks in that army tent right in the center of the photograph. To the right was a kitchen shed, and there was also baths in there. We had running water, occasionally hot water, and I think electricity 2 or 3 hours a day from a generator. So it was very, very primitive and pristine. And so this is where the scientists lived that work in the area. This is the head ranger. Abednego Planazi was his name. Smarty here asked, "I suppose you got a brother named Ishak?" And he said yes, and a brother named Shadrach too. So he was a good guy. They're all Zulus here, and this was his cousin, his niece, I guess, Sula. This was the group that we were with, and I'm over there on the far right. And it was an interesting mix of people. Of the two girls with the green shirts, the one on the right was my favorite. This was Tina. And Tina was working in the kitchen at the time. And one day while we were there, a man she'd never seen before knocked on the window and proposed to her. He said he had 6 cows to trade and he would be very interested in having her hand in marriage. And she said, well, she didn't think that was appropriate right now. Come back and see me later. And 2 days later, he was back and knocked on the window again and said, up the ante to 9 cows. And Tina said, look, I'm 19 years old. I want to get a college degree in biology. And after that, maybe you come and see me and we'll talk. So she was a kick. And when we left, I hugged her, a big hug goodbye. I said, don't you settle for any less than 100 cows. She was great. So when we had some afternoon time, one of the things that was fun to do was just get out and do animal sighting. And the biologists were wonderful about that, loading us into the back of a pickup truck to go out and see what we could see. This is typical of what you'd see. These are a bunch of impala crossing the street. This was a whole herd of savanna baboons. And these young ones, the sort of teenagers in the foreground, were riding branches down. They were just having the best time kicking around. In the background, just at the top, you can see a big black mass there. This was the big male, and these are formidable animals. Abednego told me, we were talking about them, and he said, one time I saw a big male baboon and a leopard having a fight. And I said, who won? He said, neither one of them won. So this is the old female baboon who was having a little snack alongside the road. And these giraffes, I thought they were just fabulous creatures. They're calm and considerate, and they, as you can see, most of them were interested in me here. One wasn't at all. He had something else on his mind. But those heads are a weapon. These animals look ungainly, but they're very capable of taking care of themselves. And when they swing that head, this is a little bit of love going on here, but when they're in a combative situation, they swing that head and they have a thing going. This is a skull of a giraffe that I found while we were hiking. The whole skeleton was scattered around there. But unlike most horned animals in the world, where the horn is grown separate from the skull, those horns in the giraffe are an integral part of the skull. And they can really do some damage when they swing that head back and forth like a sledgehammer. But I just love these animals. Look at the eyelashes on them, sort of real Disney faces. They're just so wonderful. So one thing that was an advantage in driving around in the back of the pickup truck is the animals associate pickup trucks with safety. A human being walking is a threat. They've been predated for centuries. But the back of a pickup truck, you could back right up. This was a little scene that we saw, and here's the little calf coming up to have a look at us, and right behind him is Mama, and you don't fool around with Mama. Her probably 3,500 pounds. Here you can see that she's wet on the side. Because they love those mud baths where they can get in there and clean their skin out from parasites. And this old male, we just backed the truck up, and I got right up close to him like this. So the seventh day, as the Lord said, was a day of rest, and I talked myself into getting a ride over to St. Lucia Bay. And these, of course, are hippos. And the bay was full of them. And this is what they look like when you get up close. These are formidable animals. Hippos are said to kill more people in Africa than any other species. They weren't listed on the danger list where we were, where in order of danger for Louis Ampelosi was elephants first, black rhino second, and Cape buffalo third. And the reason hippos aren't on there are no hippos in the in Louis Ampelosi, but here they are, and along with them in St. Lucia Bay there are the Nile crocodiles, huge animals. This is not a threat that he's doing. This is air conditioning. This is how they control their temperature. They open their mouths to cool things off. And other interesting things, this was the Goliath heron, which is the tallest heron in the world. It stands as much as 5 feet high, which is quite an imposing bird. The hippos live in the water during the day to protect their skins from the sun. They emerge at night, and they can travel several kilometers away from the water to graze before returning when the light comes. They don't swim. They walk on the bottom. It's basically what they do. So they're limited to very shallow water. And here you can see a daytime scene where just the two of them are resting their heads on another hippo to have a little snooze during the day. This was a 2-week-old pup or calf, I guess you'd call it, that had just been born. So I just throw this picture as a reminder that remember how dangerous these animals are. They are quite deadly, mainly because people who can't swim are dumped from boats because the hippos are protecting their territory and they don't want people there, so they charge them. So drowning is the main cause of death. So that was the first week. And the next Monday, off we went again for another week of travel on the transects. The first morning of that, there were 3 of us volunteers and 3 Zulus with their rifles sitting in the back. And it was just first light. And all of a sudden, there was this crash, and a Cape Buffalo had crossed the road in front of the truck, and the truck hit it and caused $2,000 worth of damage. And the part I wish I could get pictures of was the mess in the back with the 6 of us with feet and heads and rifles and all up in the air. We just were in shambles. It's a wonder we didn't get hurt. But that was a little bit of adventure for early morning. They went and checked out the next day, and the buffalo had a little sore place on one of its shoulders, and that was about it. They weigh about a ton, which is probably about what the truck does. So here we were off on the transects again for another week. Now, I found this picture. This is the emblem which is on the side of the trucks that we were riding around in. And I threw this in here just to show you the flavor of the place. At the top, KZN is KwaZulu-Natal, which is the province that we were in. KZN, Nature Conservation Service, is in English. On the right-hand side, it's in Afrikaans, and on the left-hand side, it's in Zulu, which it's kind of underscores the cross-cultural aspect of here. And the symbol in the center is the white rhino, which was brought back from near extinction, and the Zulu war shield. So we all loaded on the pickup truck at this particular day with some free time, and they said, let's go see some Zulu dancing. So we said, sure, and off we went. And we got about halfway to where we were going and came down over the top of the hill, and this was on the opposite hill. This was a young buck elephant, bull elephant, who had been harassing a tourist bus until he saw us. And we were in a little pickup truck as opposed to the big, and he said, hey, this is much more interesting. So he charged us, and Abednego, whose picture I showed you, has been in the park his whole life. He knows how to deal with these things. So he just slammed the little truck in reverse, and we backed up at 40 miles an hour. At which point the elephant said, oh, the hell with that. And he said, I'm just going to stop and have a little snack. So he walked the side of the road, and he reached up and he pulled down a branch, and he had a little snack right there. And the reason we were particularly vulnerable here is you notice the pitch of the land there, and across the road to the left, it was just the same pitch. And if he had given us come upon us and given the truck a flip with his hip, we would have gone tumbling right down that hillside. So really respect these animals. We ended up going about, I think, 5 miles out of our way just to avoid this guy. And when we got to where we were going, we passed typical outside the park Zulu farm country. It's poor. It's mostly grazing animals. This in the foreground is a typical farm compound with the roundhouses. And the highways, I've been in a lot of third world countries, and usually when you get into agrarian scenes in third world countries, you see a lot of people with bicycles, with tractors, with farm implements, anything that is transportation on wheels. You didn't see any of that in South Africa. Everybody walked. And so these were school kids coming back from school. Now, when they said Zulu dancing, we thought, oh, Jesus, this is going to be some tired old roadhouse, and we're going to see a couple of people doing Zulu dancing. Well, not at all. This was one of the most fascinating parts of the whole trip. This is the high school. And inside that building is the main room, and this is it. And this is where the kids are getting their education. And around, if I go back to that photo, you can see on the right, you can see barbed wire. And the reason for the barbed wire is that things are so poor there that this place would have been even more stripped than it is if it had not been, because people have next to nothing. This was the main assembly hall for the high school. And we thought, what are we going to see here? Well, this lady appeared with her big drum, and she started beating on that drum, and these kids started to dance and started to sing, and they were fantastic. They were, this is about a 5-minute bit that they did, and the subject was HIV/AIDS. And their singing was great, their dancing was great, they were funny, and they ended up getting all kinds of applause from us. And after that came the boys. And now this is the traditional Zulu warrior costume with the animal skins. And they started to dance, and they were fantastic. This group would have gotten a standing O in any theater in the U.S., doing flips and God knows what all. So I wish I could have gotten better photographs of them. And all of this is being done on that floor full of potholes. I don't know why they didn't turn their ankles, but it was really, really exciting and great to see. And great to see the kids learning and sustaining the Zulu culture as they do. So just afterwards, I just asked a couple of kids if I could take their picture, and they all assembled here. So when I got home, I sent this picture back to the principal of the school. I said, give it to the kids. They were wonderful. So another thing that we did was some nighttime trips to see what we could see at night. This is a couple, two of the team members, volunteers, a married couple from the Midwest. And we were out to see if we could see leopards, which was at night. In the background, you can see another controlled burn going on, and it was cold. It was in the nights, it would get down to in the 40s. So my job was to, I'm looking at the stern of the truck here. My job was behind me was to reach out over the hood with a spotlight to see what we could see. Well, it wasn't too long before we found the leopard crossing the road, and she went off in the tall grass a little bit away, lay down. You can see her eye there, keeping an eye on me. And I thought, I can really get some great pictures here. I was shooting this over the top of the truck body with a telephoto lens. And just then my camera in the upper right-hand corner was going battery dead, battery dead, battery dead. And she got up and left. And this is the only picture I got out of focus as my camera totally died at the wrong time. But at least I got to see a leopard, and it was a real thrill. Now, the one thing that I hadn't seen on the whole trip of all these animals was a black rhino. And this was the last day. And what happened on that last day happened so fast that I couldn't even get my camera out of my pocket. So we had to go back. Me and Alfred here was the Zulu guy. He's the only of the Zulus with a Christian name. Went back and reconstructed it so I could get this photograph. And what happened was he and I were walking along, and we walked down between those two bushes that you can see there. It was a quiet day. It was the last day. There wasn't much going on. I was kind of daydreaming a little bit. And he got to the other side of those two bushes, and all hell broke loose. He started to shout. There was this huge thrashing. He was backing up. He was shucking shells out of his rifle. And he was yelling in Zulu, and I knew damn well what he was yelling was climb a tree. And when I looked around, well, you can see how many trees there were. And just then, a black rhino who had been gnawing on the other side of that bush split out to the left and cut across that open field. And it was really an amazing sight. And here I am, my camera's in my pocket. I'm scared to death. He's scared to death. So I never got a picture, but I saw my black rhino, and boy, I'll tell you, those things can run 35 miles an hour. They are pretty amazing creatures. So that was probably one of the real excitements of the trip. So just to conclude here, one thing that no, let's just do it this way. This was a sort of pastiche of the kind of thing that you can see from the back of a pickup truck. They had told us that there was a lion pair that were mating. So let's go see them. So the big young male was camped out here in the sun, and over to his right was this mud bath. And while I was getting my camera out of my pocket, this old bull white rhino was flat on his back with all 4 feet in the air, rubbing his back in the grass. So he decided to head off into the grass here. And you notice at his stern, I'm going to enlarge that. This is something that they do to leave their mark behind. And they are one of the few male animals that urinate backwards. So that's what he's doing. You can see the impala watching him here, and I couldn't resist just adding this little thing here. So he headed off into the grass, and one of the things that we noticed was that the impala that you can see the herd here were looking over their shoulder behind them, and something was going on. And just after I took this picture, they all leapt up into the air, ran to the right, and ran up into a hill. And out of the grass came the breeding pair that we had come to see, who walked over there. Oh, I'm sorry. And they got to here, and then the impala sprung up. That's right. And ran off to the right, up to a little hill, and then stood there looking back. You can see they're all females except for the second one from the left, which is the bull. This is a harem, and this is how they work. One bull, depending on how good he is, will have anywhere from 3 or 4 to sometimes 15 or so females and immature males. So they were looking back where they came from, and just then we realized because this is what came out of that tall grass where they'd been standing, another lioness, and she came over and greeted the two. As the guide said afterwards, they're probably sisters. And then she went and lay down, and they lounged around for a while. And then the female came over and said, time for another one. And so he got up and he did his thing, and he did it so fast that I couldn't even get the camera focused before he was done. They breed. They will breed. She will be an estrus for 3 to 4 days, and they will breed 100 to 150 times during that time. And he's exhausted at the end. She's exhausted. And actually, the gestation will not start for about 50% of them. In other words, it takes about 50% of the time. So that was my introduction to lion breeding, and it was very, very quaint. You can see her tail sort of lovingly wrapped around his thigh there. So that was that, and that is the end of my talk. So I apologize not having an image, but there's no camera on this particular computer. But if anybody is unmuted and has questions, I'll do my best to answer them.